Phones on silent, that would be fantastic. If you want to talk to us, we'd love to hear from you on Twitter during and after the event. And you can see on the screen the Wi-Fi network and the hashtag, if you use the hashtag Guardian Live. Now, if you'd please welcome tonight's host, Andrew Rawnsley.
Good evening, everybody. And looking at you, I can instantly see we have an audience completely engaged with political ideas and arguments. How do I know this? I just want to look at you because I've just been outside where the sun is shining. A lovely light breeze is rippling in across the water. Alcoholic drinks are flowing. Generally, people are enjoying a lovely July evening in the lovely city of Bristol. But you have chosen to spend your time inside, listening to these two men debate why one or other of them should be Lib Dem leader. So I congratulate you, audience, on your dedication and interest in politics. Dedication. Yes, be word for it. Now, I do sometimes say you don't have to be a masochist to be a Lib Dem, but it can help. And the last election almost defies adjectives to what it did to Liberal Democrat representation in the House of Commons, down from 56 MPs to 8. The two gentlemen with me here, the two leadership contenders, by themselves represent a quarter of the current Liberal Democrat parliamentary party. On the brighter side for Liberal Democrats, nearly 2.5 million people still thought they were worth a vote. So where there's life, there's some hope. And they keep telling us that they've gained some extra members since election defeat, sympathy members. Some existing members might think to themselves, it'd be nicer if you joined us before the election rather than afterwards. But there we are. Every extra member is no doubt welcome to the Liberal Democrats. Now, the format of this evening is fairly simple. I'm going to give the two candidates a chance to clear their throats by making some opening statements. Then I'm going to quiz them for a little while, and then I'm going to throw it open to all of you to quiz them as well, your opportunity. So think of the most wicked questions you can. Quick biographies, I'm sure they're both very familiar to you. Norman is 57 and was born in Watford. Tim is 45 and was born in Preston. Norman was PPS to Nick Clegg before becoming a minister in the coalition government, latterly at Health as Minister of State for Care and Support. Tim was president of the Liberal Democrats between 2011 and 2014. Norman is an agnostic. Tim is a Christian, a firm Christian. And one of the questions we might put to him is this: if God is so all-knowing and all-powerful, what do the Lib Dems do to earn so much wrath at the election? So there's the brief biographies. We'll learn more, I hope, about the candidates as the evening goes on. Just whilst we were backstage, we drew lots as to who would go first, and as a result of that, we decided Tim was going to go first with his opening statement. Tim Farron, the floor's yours.
Andrew, got about 5 minutes, is that right? Something
yes,
like
about
that?
5.
Great, okay. Right, I mean, thank you very much for being here in tremendous weather. Just to make sure you haven't yet fallen asleep, audience participation. Hands up if you have ever voted Liberal Democrat in your life. All right? Keep your hands up if you voted for us on the 7th of May. There you go. That's a better proportion than most, I have to say. My job, you can put your hands down now, my job is to make sure those of you who put your hands down for the second question can be convinced by the end of this evening and come up to me and tell me that if I lead the party, you will come back to us. Time flies. It is 9 weeks today since the Liberal Democrats were absolutely and utterly annihilated. And just because the conversation may have moved on doesn't change the fact one iota that our party lost 85% of our members of Parliament and over 2/3 of our voters in a single election. And so the fight for Liberal Britain, that's a huge question and a huge project. If you listen to the Guardian's Polly Toynbee or the Times' Danny Finkelstein, both ex-SDP, by the way, they will tell you that the fight for Liberal Britain is a fight that you should have in another party. Give up on the Liberal Democrats. Your time has gone. Go and spend some time with Liberals somewhere else. As Andrew indicated, though, 20,000 new Liberal Democrats joined the party in the last 9 weeks. That kind of tells you maybe we should get annihilated more often. For a party to have got as badly beaten as we did and to see its membership go up by over 30% is absolutely staggering. So those people believe that the future and the fight for liberal Britain best happens from within the Liberal Democrats, and I choose to agree with those 20,000 people rather than Polly or with Danny. And here's the reason why liberal Britain needs fighting for. Since the last election, so those 9 weeks that have passed since, hasn't David Cameron made it very clear that there is a devastating need for liberalism in this country? The 12 billion attack on welfare, seen much of it yesterday. The attack on the Human Rights Act under the gaze of the statue of Winston Churchill. The introduction of the Snoopers Charter. Anti-extremism orders, the selling off, shameful selling off of housing association properties around the West Country. Those things are things that only the Liberal Democrats will stand up and fight against to ensure that the Liberal voice is heard and heard clearly. And the question is why we got such a drubbing on May the 7th. Well, we're perhaps going to explore that in some detail in a moment. But I want to suggest that amongst the reasons was that we went into the election telling people kind of what we weren't and not telling them what we were, and not telling people very much more than what we would do, and certainly not explaining who we are. And I am desperate that not just the west of England, but the whole of the United Kingdom knows who the Liberal Democrats are and likes who the Liberal Democrats are. So we must pick issues that tell people who we are. We are the kind of people who are internationalist, anti-nationalist, outward-looking, generous-spirited. Therefore, we will lead the fight to keep Britain at the heart of the European Union. We are the kind of people who stand on the side of the powerless, no matter whether it wins us votes or not. Therefore, we will speak with unnuanced compassion for the refugees at Calais and elsewhere. We are the kind of people who say that nothing robs you of your liberty more than poverty and poor housing. Therefore, we will stand up and fight against the sell-off of housing association properties in this Parliament. You see, some of you who've been members of the party for a period of time will know that this is not our first near-death experience as a movement. And under previous leaders, under Joe Grimman, David Steele, Paddy Ashdown, we have come back, but we must not assume we have any right to do so. The survival of the liberal movement in this country is absolutely essential and not inevitable. And if we are to make it inevitable, then we must learn from another of our former leaders, the tragically mourned Charles Kennedy, who passed away just a month ago. I want to just finish my remarks by just observing this about Charles. 3 things about him. His humanity, his ability to connect with people in a way which was utterly different than other politicians. He made people feel that he was in the room with you. And if the messenger is believed, the message gets through. Secondly, utterly principled. Don't you dare think from 12 years hence that opposing the Iraq war was an easy populist thing for Charles to do. No, it was not. You had the whole of the tabloid media and you had all the Tory and Labour Party MPs surrounding him, calling him for being a traitor, for being the Charlie Chamberlain, for somebody who was standing against the national interest, and he stood firm, and I am proud of Charlie Kennedy. So yeah, human, principled, and finally, effective. He led us to our best result since Lloyd George's day, and I want to just leave you with this. Here's my hypothesis. Human, principled, effective, those 3 things are connected. We have just seen an election result won on the basis of fear because Linton Crosby and the Tories were smarter and better than anybody else was. And the bad guys had all the best moves this time round. Charles Kennedy proves that the good guys can win. I am determined that over these next 4 years, the good guys will win again. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Now let's hear from Norman.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, this election coming up is one that I can confidently predict will be won by a Liberal Democrat. And this is something that should encourage us, but I hope it will be the first of very many. Now, as we survey the wreckage from the general election, I think it's fair to say that progressive politics in this country faces a crisis. Not just, incidentally, the Liberal Democrats, but the Labour Party as well. We face a near-death experience, there's no doubt about that, but the Labour Party's route back to power looks highly challenging. And there are many people within the Labour Party now who are questioning how they will recover their position as a governing party. So the question, I suppose, is, does it matter that the liberal voice in our country has been so badly diminished? And my answer is emphatically yes, it does matter, and that it is absolutely critical that we rebuild the liberal voice in this country. If you look at what has happened since the general election, as Tim has said, the threat to the Human Rights Act, the plans to crumple over privacy and the rights of the citizen in terms of surveillance powers, the Sloopers Charter, but above all else, the budget that was delivered yesterday, the Institute of Fiscal Studies today has said that this is a regressive budget. So if you strip away all the hype, what you come down to is that this budget increases the divide between rich and poor. It will take up to £1,000 away from so-called hard-working families in the Tory lexicon, people who are in work, on low pay, getting their income cut by £1,000. They are abolishing maintenance grants for students. These are students from the poorest backgrounds, and it was part of the settlement, a highly controversial settlement, of course, in the last Parliament, that those students from the poorest backgrounds got increased maintenance grants. And actually what we've seen is an increase in the number of students from the poorest backgrounds getting to university. This change undermines that, undermines it in a very dangerous way. And then there is the plan for inheritance tax, which will give a tax cut to millionaires at the same time as we're cutting the pay of people in work on very low pay. That, for me, is something that I completely reject. So for me, the importance, the imperative of building a progressive, radical, liberal movement of change is overwhelming. This country needs an alternative to the Conservatives, and it is our duty to seek to provide it. Let me just run through what I would call a 5-point plan for the steps that we need to take in order to, again, succeed and challenge the Conservatives. The first step is that we need to get our party sorted out. We need to get it fit for purpose. It is surely a bit scandalous that this is the least diverse party in British politics, and yet we're a liberal party that believes fundamentally in diversity. We have failed, and we will not succeed. It's a conditioned precedent for our recovery that we sort this out, that by 2020 we can hold our heads high and say that we are now properly diverse, that every individual in our party, whoever they are, has the chance to succeed. And we have to surely reflect modern Britain if we are to be in any way attractive to modern Britain. So that's the first essential step for our recovery. The next step is that we must once again become an effective campaigning party, a party that can win elections. We used to be feared in the 1990s. We used to be capable of winning seats. The idea that we just campaign harder to win is not enough on its own. We campaigned ourselves into the ground in May, and we largely lost our seats. So let's become again an effective campaigning machine. Third, I want to go back to that great radical liberal, Joe Grimmond, in the 1960s. He was an inspiration to that generation. He got people thinking again. He came up with the big liberal solutions to the challenges of that age. He brought in big thinkers from outside the party. There was a dynamism about it. And fundamentally, you have to win the battle of ideas. Let me return to the budget. If we simply, on the progressive side of politics, just say no to the Conservatives will win the argument. We need to have progressive, liberal solutions to the challenges of our time, particularly how we manage a welfare state in the modern age, how we continue to protect our vital public services, particularly health and care and education. We have to be on the front foot in the argument with Conservatives, or we will lose to the Conservatives. And it's only by winning the battle of ideas, combined with effective campaigning, that you become an unstoppable force. Next, we have to surely inspire a new generation of young people to our cause. Young people are overwhelmingly liberal in their values, their instincts, their attitudes, but overwhelmingly they don't associate themselves with the Lib Dems. But they're open, they're dynamic, they're internationalists. They believe in opportunity. They want to see radical reform to our antiquated drug laws. They want to see equal access in mental health, something that I have spent a lot of my time fighting for. They want to see liberal solutions to our housing crisis. We have to show them that we are the party that represents their values. And then finally, we must reject tribalism. If we all, as on the progressive side of politics, retreat into a tribal approach where we refuse to talk to others, the Tories will dominate for a generation. In this city, this great liberal progressive city, we have to be prepared to talk to others. So this week, I've met with Caroline Lucas this week to talk to her about the potential for collaboration in Parliament over things where we agree. Europe, human rights, the massive imperative of tackling climate change. These are things where progressives need to work together to come up with solutions to take on the Tories. And I've also talked to IPPR, the think tank, about providing a forum for progressives to come together to talk about the big solutions, the challenge, how we meet the challenges in a liberal, progressive way, and they are up for it. So in all of these ways, if we take these steps, I believe, at a time when, in many ways, this is a liberal age, there are so many people out there who share our values but who don't associate themselves with us. Things change very rapidly. If we can connect with those people, if we can come up with liberal solutions to the challenges of our age, then I believe that we can build a liberal, radical, progressive movement of change and that we can prevail. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Norman. So I want to start by picking up on some points, both from different elements of your opening statements. At this stage, I'd be appreciated, gentlemen, if we could keep the answers fairly brief, not too Gladstonian. That would be appreciated. Tim Farron, you said you basically said you fought the general election the wrong way. You fought it as a sort of centrist, will restrain the other big two if we end up with one or the other, clearly thinking you should have offered something more radical. Do you go even further and say the entire coalition with the Tories was one epic mistake?
No, I don't, but I think that probably the die was cast by the Christmas in the first year of the coalition, 2010. I think that I don't want to overly criticise the general election campaign, although I thought there was something...
Why not? Why not?
Well,
it wasn't very successful after all, was it?
Because I think in many ways the damage had been done. I think if you offer people something which is not quite as bad as Labour and not quite as bad as the Tories, you're giving people quite a good reason to give you their second preference in an alternative vote election, which you might recall is a system we do not have in this country. So I think sort of centrism is pointless, it's uninspiring, I'm not a centrist, but I do set the view that the damage was done early on, and we could have learnt lessons easy after the fact, isn't it, from our very successful experience in Scotland, when we had two coalitions with Labour, and it's not because it was successful because they were with Labour, it's because they were successful because we made choices earlier on which proved to people that we had backbone and we were able to get our narrative across.
Let me go to Norman now. Norman, do you think the entire general election campaign, as Tim is saying, was entirely misconceived, fighting as a centrist party?
I think it was a poorly conceived campaign in many respects. And I suppose above all, the moment when my heart sank right at the start of the campaign was when we were all told to repeat the mantra that we will cut less than the Conservatives and borrow less than Labour. Because it defines ourselves in relation to others. It says nothing about our purpose as Liberals. And if you don't define to people, describe to people what you're about, what you're trying to achieve, the fact that you seek to make a difference to people's lives in a particular way, then you give no reason to vote for us. And so I think that was a big mistake. And it got worse then, because we then started insulting people. We said that we would give a brain to Labour and a heart to the Conservatives. So it's like saying to Labour-inclined or Tory-inclined voters, you either haven't got a brain or a heart, but come and vote for us anyway.
So a brainless or a bastard.
Yeah, exactly. So I sort of tend to think that insulting people is not the best way to win friends and influence people.
Okay. Would you, Norman, say never... I mean, it doesn't look very likely at the moment. It's not a live issue, but I think it'll help the audience find out where both of you are coming from. Would you say never again to a coalition with the Conservatives?
I don't think you should ever rule out coalitions with any particular party. One thing I think we've got to absolutely avoid is to be seen as an adjunct to another party. We've got to be very clearly and unambiguously a Liberal party which believes in social justice, and we've got to be clear that we fight that cause and we seek to deliver that cause, whoever we're in coalition with. But there is one condition that I would absolutely put on any coalition, and that is there must be proportional representation.
Tim, would you say never again to a coalition with the Tories?
I'm going to give the same answer to that as Norman, really. I think, you know, I did not join the Liberal Party as it then was as a career move. Which is a good thing. But I didn't join to cop out either. If you want to get involved in politics, you surely want to hold power. And if you just say you'll only ever go in with one or not the other, then you're completely limiting your options. But what we clearly have learned is that we must not enter into any coalition with any other party unless PR is delivered in the first 12 months.
Can I put it to both of you, though? You may be holding out a bit of an illusion to Liberal Democrat members, and this is why we still have a first-past-the-post system, after all. You can't introduce proportional representation until you've won under first-past-the-post.
However,
funnily enough, when people win under first-past-the-post, they suddenly discover, it's got its virtues after all.
There is a change. Well, we wonder whether the SNP, having won 110% of the seats in Scotland on 50% of the vote, might now change their tune. We hope not. I think the real change, though, is in Scotland. I think the next Labour leader, if they are even remotely self-aware, will work out that there is no place or no way Labour are coming back in Scotland. If you look at the SNP, what are they? They are avowedly centre-left and massively authoritarian, i.e. they're the Labour Party. In which case, there is no place for Labour in Scotland. In other words, there is no way for Labour to get a majority under first-past-the-post. I think they will change their mind this Parliament.
All right, I want to get a bit down and dirty now and personal.
Oh, dear.
Norman, what have you got that he hasn't?
Well, I guess, in a sense, my pitch is that I've got a record of fighting for and winning on Liberal values at a national level. So, I mean, before I was a minister, I took on Tony Blair over freedom of information and won a landmark ruling that meant that every citizen in our country has the right to know who our minister and our prime ministers meet with, who influences them in the decisions that they reach. That's an important win for Liberal values. I took on BAE Systems, who were responsible for the most outrageous and indeed it proved corrupt deal in selling a military air traffic control system to one of the poorest countries in the world. I actually collaborated with Claire Short, who was the development secretary at the time.
And you're saying Tim couldn't do anything?
I'm telling you what my record is nationally. Yeah. And then as a campaigning minister, I fought for equality for those who suffer from mental ill health and secured some really important gains. So we halved the number of people who end up in police cells in a moment of mental health crisis. We've introduced the first ever maximum waiting time standards in mental health, which is potentially transformational.
Was that your proudest thing you did?
No, I'm incredibly proud. I'm on a total mission on this, and this is a historic injustice. The fact that people who suffer from mental ill health do not have the same right to access treatment is an outrage.
Important issue, but I don't want to do an injustice to Tim.
Sure, one more point? So I guess it's that record of fighting for and winning Liberal values, and I think I can deploy that in the party's interests effectively.
Okay, let's flip this round. What have you got that he ain't got?
Unfair question. I thought Norman answered that very, very well by playing up his own virtues, and I know he go at me, so I'll do the same in return. I think when all said and done, we've spent 5 years. If you're a Liberal Democrat activist, you spent 5 years knocking on doors, getting derided. Those will seem like the good years, because the next 5 years will get ignored. And in the words of Oscar Wilde, there's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about. So I hope, it's for other people to judge, I hope I've got the capacity to just be different, sound different, different, be spiky, get attention because we desperately need it. I'm somebody who believes passionately in liberal values. I read all my John Stuart Mill and my T.H. Green and my L.T. Hobhouse. I'm a very strong supporter of the things that people like Norman did in coalition. I wrote a large chunk of the manifesto that in 2010 ended up becoming government policy, including the referee we have now to make sure that farmers in the West Country get a decent deal against supermarkets. But when all said and done, all the wonderful things that Norman and others achieved in government, you can't do it now. And you can't change the world from second, third or fourth place. So I hope what I've got is the ability to communicate and to win and to get us back in power.
But I mean, you raise a very important point, which will face either of you, whoever becomes leader. I mean, let's be frank, at the moment, the Labour Party, with more than 200 MPs, is struggling to attract attention. And you've got rather less than 200 MPs. I mean, name me one thing you'd be able to campaign on and you'll again get the attention. I mean, these good people, because they're very interested in politics, are probably not representative of the average voter. They're out there having a drink. Name me one thing that's going to grab the British people by the lapels rather than thinking, oh, that's that party. Well, used to be in government, now what's it got, 7, 8 MPs? Why
any issue where 70% of the population will agree with you will by definition be an issue somebody else has grabbed. So we have got to be bold, and I understand that my job is not to get us, you'll be disappointed to hear, 40% of the vote and 326 seats in 5 years' time. My job is to get us out of single figures, into double, through the teens, into the 20s, by taking bold positions on that resonate with many people, though not everyone. If we get the Mail...
Give me one bold position.
Okay, well, we will fight against the Snoopers Charter. We will fight in favour of protecting the human rights side. We will ensure, for example, that we will fight against anti-extremism orders. We will fight Labour, unless they select Comrade Corbyn, will sit on the fence over housing association sell-offs. We will fight those things. We will say, our aspiration is for the 2 million people rotting on a council house waiting list. We will take bold positions that the majority of people will not like, but 25% of people will absolutely love.
Norman, give me one of your bold positions. Something that's really going to grab an electorate that, frankly, most of them are not interested in your party.
No, absolutely.
It's going to grab them by the lapel, saying, the Lib Dems are worth listening to after all.
So I think, look back to Paddy Ashdown. He was leading a party that was pretty small in the 90s, that was being ignored, that had gone through its own trauma with the merger of the two parties and the alliance. And he managed to capture people's imagination because he used his experience and his standing and his reputation on international affairs as a former diplomat, as a former member of the Special Boat Service and so forth, to reach out and to take on big international issues, the boat people, the Hong Kong passports issue. And I think I can, through the work that I've done on the NHS and particularly on mental health and elderly care, this is an area which affects every single family in our country, and where the system is going to crash in this Parliament unless some radical decisions are taken and unless we make the case for extra investment. Now, because I have a reputation and some credibility on that issue, it means you can get onto media in a way that often you can't. And I'm on a mission on this. It is critically important for every family in our land. And I think that we can get a voice heard because no one else is actually making this case, particularly on the historic injustice of mental health.
Okay, now we all know, I mean, and this is relevant to what we've just been talking about, modern leadership these days, I mean, it's a tough game and a lot of personality comes in it. So I'm going to get really quite rude to you both now about that. Tim Farron, Paddy Ashdown said of you, judgment is not his strong suit. Other colleagues who've observed you closely in the House of Commons, I'm not going to read the whole list because I'm not that nasty.
It's very long.
But others have also said disobliging things. Now, when the senior colleagues with you in Parliament have a rather low opinion of you, and you could argue they're the people who know Tim Farron best, they've seen you in action down in the House of Commons, judgment is not his strong suit, says former leader Ashdown. You don't want a leader who hasn't got judgment, do you?
Well, I've put it this way, I'm the only Liberal Democrat candidate in the general election we just had who got more than 50% of the vote. That must show some level of judgment.
Well, that could be popularity, not judgment.
As to what works, as what messages work with the electorate and how you can communicate with people. And, you know, when all said and done, people say, things about you and you just got to take it on the chin. And if you get wounded by those things, then you shouldn't be in all this. And in the end, my pitch, I guess, is about an ability to be able to inspire, motivate, build a campaigning winning team. And if that sometimes ruffles feathers, then I will apologise, but not very sincerely. Because my sense is that the Liberal Democrats' survival and thriving is more important than me always pleasing all of the elder statesmen of my party.
Okay. Norman, I'm going to be rude about you now. Yeah, people say, you know, intelligent man, nice man.
Well, thank you. It's good so far. I know something else is coming.
Now comes the but. Bit dull. Where's the charisma? Has he got the campaigning fire to revive a party that's in such a deep hole? And you've got quite a lot of endorsements from the establishment who led you to that disaster, who Tim was saying he can do with that.
Yeah, interestingly, I've also got the head of Liberal Youth supporting me, and the two leaders of Liberal Youth in Scotland supporting me. And because I've been prepared to sort of set out quite a radical platform, particularly on things like reform of our outrageous drug laws that manage to criminalise so many young people and put billions of pounds into the hands of criminals. This is a completely failed public policy. And, you know, you don't have to shout to get across to people sometimes. I won my seat against the Tories, a 15,500 Tory majority in North Norfolk, and I've held it, despite being a minister in a government, despite putting sort of body and soul into that job, we held the seat.
So Norman, if I could just come in, I mean, that's one thing fighting a constituency. You say
sure.
You don't have to shout. But I put it to you, you're competing against the Tory majority government, Labour, the SNP, UKIP. I mean, maybe you will have to bloody well shout to get any attention.
No, well, you know, you do, but you also have to be smart. You have to pick issues, and you have to be audacious and challenge the sort of received wisdom on things like assisted dying. This is central to my liberalism, this. Should it be the individual or should it be the state that decides your fate if you face terminal illness? So getting out there and talking about issues that are absolutely not talked about most of the time in the Westminster Village, but are absolutely cared about and thought about and talked about out there in the real world. And you know, when I was minister responsible for mental health, I remember an interview on the Today programme with Evan Davis, and he was expecting me. There was another sort of example of the way in which people with mental ill health are let down. They've been shunted around the country, finding a bed hundreds of miles away from home. And he expected me to sort of defend what had happened and to sort of say it's all getting better. And I won't do that.
Yeah,
I will tell it straight.
Yeah.
And
well, you won't have to defend any government actions.
It's a great relief.
I think I'm going to bring...
It's a great relief. But that's the way you break through to people,
all right,
telling it straight.
I'm going to bring Tim in there. Now, Tim, as I said in the intro, you're a man of professed and deep Christian convictions, and there's been some rumble around this campaign that maybe that's incompatible with being a leader of the Liberal Party. And people particularly point to some of the inconsistencies in your parliamentary votes on gay rights. How do you explain those?
Well, first of all, I voted in favour, you talk about equal marriage, I voted in favour...
Not on the third reading, you didn't, did you? You weren't
second
there.
Reading.
But on the third reading, where were you on the third reading?
I abstained on third reading.
Why?
Because I had voted for 2 amendments the night before, which were basically to allow people of conscience to be able to, if you're a registrar, and you were a Muslim, for example, and you wanted to politely step back with no fuss and not conduct
but
the
let's
same
be clear, you voted with a bunch of right-wing Tories to delay implementation of the legislation.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. I voted for second reading. I voted against the programme motion to create more time to discuss those issues, and also, by the way, to allow us to discuss something called the spousal veto, which means transgender people at the moment don't have the same access to equal marriage.
Do you regret any of those votes? Do you wish you just voted down the line for gay rights?
I don't regret the votes on the amendments, because I think it's right to challenge those sorts of things. I regret, because I didn't vote for it at third reading because those amendments fell, I regret the sense that anybody might take from that I'm against equal marriage. I'm not, I'm for it. But I think if Liberals can't ask those questions, I'm not sure who can.
I mean, the broader point, though, it can be a dilemma, can't it? I mean, being a Liberal with deep Christian convictions, how are you going to reconcile that when issues like abortion,
so there are simple, I mean, the sort of simple answer and the off-the-cuff answer is to say, you know, Charles Kennedy was a committed Roman Catholic, and in many ways for whom some of these issues are even more troubling, shall we say, than they would be for myself. But nevertheless, He spent 7 years as our leader, very successful leader, and ensured that he never allowed his personal faith to interfere. But nevertheless was driven by it in terms of his stance on issues like the Iraq War. I think that's a good model. Having said that, just to turn this on its head, I think it's quite peculiar that, and quite offensive to people who are not Christians, and indeed particularly to people who are not religious at all, to assume that only a Christian would ever have a conscience that would trouble them. I mean, if you're telling me that nobody who isn't a Christian in this room has a conscience, that's quite insulting, and it's not in my experience.
All right. Tim, Norman, your camp has been accused of trying to exploit Tim's Christian belief for your advantage of your campaign. Indeed, you had to suspend 2 of your aides when they were caught privately polling party members with negative questions about Tim's Christian beliefs. Now, you've regretted that, and you've said you instantly suspended them, etc., etc. But what does it say about a potential Lamb leadership that you'd have people around you like that?
Well, it's not a question regretting sounds like in some way I was involved and regret doing it. I had no idea that this was happening. And I think actually the mark of leadership is that when something like that happens, you have to act properly and quickly. And I immediately, that evening, talked to Tim and apologised to him for...
Did he grovel profusely? How good was the grovel?
He said, sorry, he clearly meant it, I obviously accept it, let's move on.
All right.
And I said that they could have no further part in the campaign.
I mean, the question for you would... we take your word for all that.
Yeah.
You didn't know, you acted immediately. But of course, the question for your judgment is you hired them in the first place.
Well, you don't always know what every member of your team may be capable of doing in the heat of battle. Those two made a serious error of judgment, and it was wrong. I don't want this campaign to be fought on negative campaigning, so I didn't want to have anything to do with it and told them that they must not play any further part.
OK. Let's move on a bit more to how you're going to rebuild the Liberal Democrats. I think both of you have said you need to reach out to young people. I'll start with you, Tim. How are you ever going to get young people back after the tuition fees debacle?
Well, first of all, tuition fees was never about fees. It was always about trust. And it's interesting, I've spoken to audiences of similar size, but even younger than this one, around the country for the last 5 years. Generally, university campuses at sixth forms in my patch and around the country. And I will make the case for the new system being much fairer and more progressive than the one it replaced. And do you know what? I'll get a smattering of applause very often. And only because, perversely, in the first 20 seconds, I said I didn't vote for it. I voted against it. Because it was never about fees and always about trust. So reputations, trust, take years to build and seconds to lose. And so if you think you can rebuild it like that, then you're quite wrong. But it means understanding with young people. So I got involved in politics as a teenager because I watched a rerun of Cathy Come Home and it broke my little heart. I spent 3 weeks pocket money and joined Shelter and then joined the Liberals. And my take is, I'm sure I'm abnormal, but I hope I'm not that abnormal, that most young people get involved in politics if they do, not because someone patronises them talking about a young person's issue, but because they get them there. And I believe that not just young people, but especially young people around the country, we can get them there when we talk about standing up for the refugees, we still talk about standing up for the 2 million people on a council house waiting list, when we talk affectionately and with compassion for our neighbours in the European Union, and that's why we want to stay part of it. So there are great ways of inspiring people, but don't talk down to them about young people's issues. And fees has happened, we're just going to move on.
Norman, what's your answer to this truck? Because I think you agree on this, don't you? Both,
yeah,
one of your big problems was this broken bond of trust with people who thought they were voting for one thing and then got something else. What's your solution to it?
I think to face up to it, to recognise that we made some massive mistakes and to apologise for that, but also to seek, and I think in a way the new leader, whoever happens to prevail, has an opportunity, doesn't mean it will succeed, but has an opportunity to build trust in them personally. So the obligation, the burden is on us to do that. And I've been going out talking in universities, particularly about the cause of mental health and of learning disability and how people so often are treated as second-class citizens. And if you talk about issues that where you clearly demonstrate your purpose, I think you can start to break through to people. And, for me, there are some massive challenges that face young people, and we must not just talk to them, we must listen to them about the things that concern them. So for me, it's getting out into schools, colleges, universities, taking the hit when they criticise us for the mistakes we've made. Well, if necessary. Yeah. but being prepared to listen and to engage and to come up with liberal solutions to those challenges.
Tim, I listened to you and you talk about, rebuilding, in a sense, this is going back to the old roots of the Liberal Party. Liberals as campaigners, campaigning organisation. Now, some would say, yeah, that worked really well for us when we were a protest party. We won lots of by-elections. That's how we accumulated all those seats, which were then lost at the last general election. But it's harder now, because there's a lot more competition, isn't there? There's UKIP, if you want to have a protest, or there's the Greens, and they're not tainted by government in the way you are. Is there really a future for the Liberal Democrats as a sort of souped-up protest party?
Well, I don't want us to be a souped-up protest party, but I do want us to be absolutely appealing to those people who are anti-establishment and who want things to change. But you absolutely put your finger on a major challenge for us. I mentioned Grimmond and Steele and Ashdown leading us back from the brink in the past. And, the one thing those guys had going for them that neither Norman or I do is the guarantee of us being the third party. We have to scrap for that now. We absolutely. So the assumption that all we need to do is, present a nice new manifesto, stand outside of government, and somehow we'll be back on 20% in no time and winning the next by-election is not so. Having said that, looking back, we had 5,000 councillors in the last 10, 15, 20 years. We had 63 MPs at one point. We've been on 20-odd% in the polls. If that's backward-looking, I'll have that. And my sense is that we do need to build from the grassroots up. We need to give people a reason to vote for us, whether you live in a seat we can't have much chance of winning or one where we do have a good chance of winning. I want us to be getting an average of, say, 20% of the vote. But that means in places like Bristol West, in places like Thornbury and Yate, places like Yeovil, you can stack on another 20-25% based on your campaigning on the ground that wins you through. And until we get the electoral system changed, that is what we must do.
Norman, do you think there's a future as going back to, in a sense, to being the pavement politics, the campaigning party, or do you think that'll be a bit of a dead end?
I think you have to do both. I think you have to campaign very effectively on the ground. We have to return to the really important liberal principle of community politics, which is fundamentally about giving power to people and to communities and being serious about that, not doing things to people, but giving people power over their destiny and their communities. But it has to be, along with that, something else. And that's why I talked about Joe Grimmond and how he excited people. 2,000 people used to attend Young Liberal conferences in those days because people were inspired by someone who was coming up with liberal solutions. And that's why we have to think afresh. We have to win the battle of ideas. And I think the fascinating thing is that these days people behave as consumers as in their politics. The days when people vote the way their parents and their grandparents did has long gone. People will vote one way in one election, another way in another.
So Lib Dems now, pound land? I mean...
It's about having a compelling message and getting through to people and doing politics, in my view, in a different way. Talking straight to people, not sounding like you come from the Westminster bubble.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Now let's talk straight to these good people here who forsook the sunshine and the delicious alcoholic drinks to listen to the pair of you. So I'm sure they've got some very good questions for you. You'd like to raise your... Yeah, I'll start right. I think you've got your hand up first. Sorry, I got this distance. Are you a lady or a gentleman?
Oh, well, you're being very kind. Yes, my question to both of you is, the old Liberal Party, as I understand it, still exists. Would you, at some point, consider discussing with them and possibly merging with them and renaming yourselves the Liberal Party?
Okay, good question. Tim, you have a first crack at that one?
No and no. I mean, just
some people thought you were thinking about that. Is that never
I'll come to that in a second. When the Liberal Party and the SDP merged, which is 27 years ago now, crumbs, the SDP continued a bit under David Owen. And then it got the sort of by-election result against the monster raving loony party in Bootle that made him decide to wind that party up. The Liberal Party never had any MPs, the continuing Liberal Party, and they have a handful of councillors in certain places. So as a movement, in the nicest possible way, they're not exactly a force that we need to particularly get alarmed about. And so the issue of our name, when the party was first formed, we spent 18 months changing our names 3 times. And amongst the things you could mock the Liberal Democrats for was you weren't quite sure what we were called.
You were called the Salads. I'm old enough to remember. Do you
the
remember
Social and Liberal
the
Democrats, ludicrous title, wasn't my idea. Then we were the Democrats, because somehow thought, you know, sort of thought if we call ourselves the Democrats, then we'd get, you know, 50% of the vote and all the states on the seaboard, but that's not how it works, apparently. And then we decided to become the Liberal Democrats, and that's how it stuck. I call myself a Liberal because that is what I am. That is my ideology. And I'm all for a rebrand and us thinking about how we refresh our image, but I'm more bothered about what we get through and how we get across to the public. And I think changing our name would be a massive diversion.
All right. I mean, rebranding's interesting, because you'll both know what happened to... I mean, you're not the same as the FDP in Germany, but there's some similarities, and they got entirely annihilated, and since they've rebranded, they've changed their party colours, they've shot the bird, I suppose, and replaced it with something else. I mean, Tony Blair did that very successfully, the Labour Party. He realised they actually got to sort of change its name by sticking new in front of it before they'd ever get back to pair again. Do you think you need that sort of radical...
Well, I certainly understand and accept that branding is important. I want to get the substance right to start with, first of all, and to... If you go out there into the centre of Bristol and you ask people, what are the Lib Dems about? And I think you get a very vague idea about what we stand for. And that's what we've lost. And so we have to define ourselves very clearly again as a liberal, radical, progressive party. And I think then the critical thing is that if we are to win seats against Conservatives in particular in 2020, we have to be able to garner the progressive vote in those seats. So across the southwest, you know, we now have a sort of almost a one-party state in most of rural southwest England. That's very damaging for democracy. People get ignored by this government because there's no effective challenge. So we have to be able to again garner that vote. That's why the conversations with Caroline Lucas, with progressives in the Labour Party, are actually very important, because we have to have that sense of this progressive movement of change
I might come back to
by
that
2020.
in a minute, but I want to hear from somebody else in the audience. Yes, this lady here.
I'd love to hear about philosophy. Philosophizing about party and getting into religious circles and talking in groups. But what is more important, listening to people on the ground campaigning, or getting back to Jess Brown and all the rest of it? And certainly thinking about what the centralist caucus of Westminster is to people on the ground, both in our party and in government. How would you as leaders deal with that? How would you campaign?
Okay, Tim, do you want to have a bite of that first?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that there's nothing contradictory about being very, very clear about your liberal philosophy and being active campaigners who win elections and make a difference. My great political hero is somebody nearly none of you will ever have heard of, apart from Norman, because he's heard me mention it before on all the 27 things we've had. But a lady called Neva Orrell, who was my councillor in Leyland in Lancashire. You heard of her? Yeah. Well, there you are. She was she joined the Liberals in 1949. After the war, she'd lost loved ones during the war. She was an internationalist, a liberal at heart, wanting to join a party that would believe in the kind of world and European order that would make another war least likely to happen. She plumped for the Liberals at a time when we looked like made today look like a great career move by comparison to back then. And then she spent the next 53 years of her life working her socks off in a community, making a difference in the town of Leyland. Because if you say you're a liberal and you say you care about individual liberty and you care about individuals and you think they matter irrespective of the group they belong to, the class they come from, then you jolly well prove it by working hard in the community in which you live. And she served that community all the way through until the age of 89, when she passed away in her sleep after a planning committee meeting. She hated planning, she'd have preferred to go before. So I think there's no contradiction whatsoever. And what it really is important is you spend time out of Westminster talking to people who are not within the bubble, because that is one of the last times I stood at one of these things was about 14 months ago when I was pretending to be Nigel Farage in the practice for the
I heard you were very good at being Nigel Farage.
You know, I don't
you
like
were brilliant. It's better than Farage himself.
You know, it's very kind of you to say, and I've still got the purple tie. But the point is, what is he good at? And sadly, what he's good at is getting attention, getting seen, getting heard, despite having no right to be whatsoever. And so we need to be unseen, therefore, wrongly, but in his case, seen as being beyond and outside the Westminster bubble. So we've got to speak in a language, be spiky, be different, and get across to people in a way that makes sure we resonate. Because I want that firm liberal philosophy that Neva believed in so strongly, and that so many of us do too. But I can't make it happen unless I win elections.
Norman.
Well, I agree with that. And I think fundamentally you have to inspire people in order to, first of all, you have to inspire your activists to, you know, think about those nights in late November when it's pouring with rain. I was nearly used another word beginning with P. When it's pouring with rain and we have to go out and deliver another load of leaflets, or we have to go out and knock on doors in a by-election or whatever. People have to be inspired by something, by a cause, a purpose, in order to do that. There's no point in a political party unless there's something you firmly believe in, something that you're fighting and driving for. And then you have to inspire people beyond the party with an idea, with something that that makes sense, that is of value, that people can believe in. And I think if you start to do that and combine it with really effective campaigning, just as you were talking about, then you become really effective and really unstoppable. But it requires both. We can't run on empty. We can't just go out and campaign, you know, with leaflets that say nothing, that trade slogans and insults with other parties. You never get under the skin of a community. You never convince people that you're worth voting for. Give people a reason to vote for you, and then you might start to win.
Norman, but I just would concentrate on the vote in this leadership contest, because some people say you two, in terms of policy, obviously different personalities, but in terms of policy positions, are pretty much Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Can you name me a policy position of Tim's that you violently disagree with?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, there's one where we just disagree on assisted dying, for example, and Tim can speak for himself on it, and I feel it's of fundamental importance because about the rights of the individual against the state. So that's an example.
Yeah, but say in a sort of hard economic area. Or
well, I think, well, there's one issue on health and care where we've had a discussion over the last few hustings. We're incidentally on our 24th husting tonight.
Congratulate you on your stamp.
Yeah.
Or your desperation.
Exactly, a bit of both, I think. And I think Tim could speak for himself, but he's argued for free social care. Now, the truth of that is that it would require about an extra 10p on income tax, including the extra that it will cost simply to keep the system going.
So we're getting to some nitty-gritty.
So
yeah, he's a reckless spender.
Well, I just don't. I mean, it hasn't been delivered in Scotland. We tried to do it, but ultimately it's not delivered because the costs keep rising every year. We're all living longer. We're living with a whole mix of chronic conditions, and I've done quite a lot of work on this. Right. And we need to absolutely fundamentally ensure that we sustain the health and care system and bring them together. But we can't do free care.
Right. Tim, name me a policy position of Norman's that you think is woefully inadequate.
Well, we're not woefully inadequate, but I think this is an interesting issue, and it's good that we're discussing it, because I think that, you know, so another liberal hero of many people who were here, especially mine, I would call myself a Beveridge liberal. And William Beveridge, who, despite being, you know, a member of Parliament for one single year in the 1940s, nevertheless, against all the odds, wrote the blueprint for the better Britain that followed the Second World War. Massively proud of Beveridge. I would suggest that had we been living to the ages we are now, at the point Beveridge wrote the Beveridge Report, then social care would be wrapped into the National Health Service. It's become an accidental add-on provided on the cheap, and your average person providing social care for people, very often elderly, vulnerable people, will be a wonderful person who can nevertheless earn...
But it costs money, doesn't it? What about Norman's point? It costs...
Who could nevertheless...
You can't give it for free.
But let me finish my point. Who could nevertheless earn more money stacking shelves at Asda.
Yeah.
And that is no way to run things. Now, having said that, so if you were to look to merge merge social care into NHS, there would be a cost. There would also be a saving, because you would deal with a lot of issues to do with bed blocking and the movement of people between one hospital to a care home and indeed home care. So, but there would undoubtedly be a cost. I'm simply saying that maybe we should be the brave people who say, look, either in this country we allow you to rot at the point you need that care and to take your chances and live under the postcode lottery and hope for the best, or we guarantee you dignity from cradle to grave, which is what Beveridge wanted in the first place.
Right, well, there's an interesting debate and difference between the two of you on that policy. Let's have another question from the audience. Gentleman there. Yes, that gentleman.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll confess my guilt and say I'm a Lib Dem councillor and was the last...
Congratulations, you survived.
Yeah, I did. Last time by 17 votes.
Oh.
Where? Where?
Sorry, in Clifton.
In Clifton. Brilliant.
And I was the last leader of the council before the mayor took over, and I'm the surviving Lib Dem in his cabinet. The philosophies of the left and the right have two big parties representing them. And it's very clear. And they have a very tribal vote, so that even if swings away from them, they still retain hundreds of seats. And we have been a party of protest. You know, we've been very much a by-election fiction party. We make Tory noises in Tory seats and win, and we make Labour noises in Labour seats and win. And we built up to 60 seats, but we still were a party of protest. Stephen Williams won Bristol West as a protest vote against the Iraq War in 2005 and held it for 10 years. And then we were swept away in Bristol West because the protest vote, actually about 5,000 or 6,000 of it went to the Greens.
Okay.
And so how do we make liberalism as powerful a philosophy as the left for the Labour Party and the right for the Tory party?
You make a very good point. I'm going to chuck it in Norman first. We have discovered probably what your core vote is, and it's not very big, is it?
No, but I think you touch on an incredibly important point, because I've made the point earlier that I think in many respects this is a liberal age, and this is in many respects...
But people just won't vote for it.
No.
I mean, I am liberals say this all the time.
But I think
it's a liberal age, but nobody votes for liberals.
No, exactly, and so that encapsulates the challenge. But I look at Labour and I see them as an anachronism. They still have this link to organised labour. I fundamentally believe in the importance of organised labour, but I don't believe that they should be linked to a political party. And none of the leadership contenders in the Labour Party are willing to confront that. And yet I think in modern Britain it will prevent them from regaining power, because it just think it is not in accordance with this modern age. And so there is an overwhelming need, first of all, for a liberal progressive alternative to the Conservatives. And I believe in a time when change happens very fast, provided we're not tribal in this, provided we seek to bring people with us, then I think change could happen much quicker than we imagine. And I think that we are, as I say, in accordance with the spirit of our age.
All right, let me bring Tim in. Because I mean, shout violently in opposition if you disagree with this, because I'm just going to summarise. I think the core point was, you know, when it came down to it, you accumulate all these protest votes, bit of hardship, it all blows away like chaff. There's not much irreducible core left. And what are you going to do about that?
Well, I'm going to challenge the assumption in the question. I don't think we built to 62 MPs as we did under Charles on a protest vote. I think people actually did have a sense then of something that we sadly didn't have 9 weeks ago. They had a sense of who we were. Now, you know, people have a sense of what the Tories are, what Labour are. I'm not sure it's as clear as all that. It's just a darn sight clearer than what we have to offer at the moment. But in 2005 and indeed 2010, we were a party that was absolutely on the side of public sector workers. We were on the side of students. We were on the side of the Green movement. We were people who were progressives. And that is not a protest vote. That is a very clear set of people
So you seem to be suggesting, because that's where Charles put you,
indeed,
that there is a future as a party to the left of Labour.
Well, I try my best not to kind of get stuck into left v right.
Well, they do matter, though, don't they?
Well,
yeah.
they matter to you. I think to
no,
most
I think they matter to a lot of the public, actually, when they do that.
They have a sense of what they're not. I'm not quite sure people are overly fussed about a specific label. What I think is undoubtedly the case, though, that in those, and you do a disservice, forgive me, to Stephen, who won this seat with your help and others as well, because of a very positive message that he built up over many, many years, and he deserved to win the seat. So, you mean Iraq was?
The Iraq War.
But the point is, very often, the things that... So people voted Tory in massive numbers in the West Country, maybe not quite as many here in Bristol, but in the rest of the West Country, not because they had a great complex grasp of the Tory set of policies, but because they thought, bloomin' heck, we're terrified of a Miliband dog being wagged by a sturgeon tail, and they offer us security. There's a very ugly nurse, but I fear something worse. And that was all that they had going for them.
But Tim, what did it say about your voters that you would see it as disgraceful, that the black arts of Linton Crosby could so easily shift them over to the Tory column?
Iraq wasn't protest. Our position on Iraq summed up a bunch of things. It summed up a commitment to international justice. It summed up a commitment to being truthful with the population and not lying to people over dodgy dossiers. And it absolutely demonstrated a sense and the understanding of the diversity of Britain and the way in which non-white communities, particularly Muslim communities in this country, are vilified as a consequence of some of those things. So in a very simple way, it summed us up in a very, very good and wholesome way, no worse and no more comprehensively than Linton Crosby's very effective campaign of fear.
Norman, I want to just bring you in, because you had to go a bit earlier, but bring you in quickly. I mean, Tim seems to be suggesting, Back to the Future, Charles Kennedy provides the model. Do you think that's right?
Well, I look particularly to Paddy Ashdown, actually, because I think he...
So you're a Paddy man. We've got another split now. Ashdownites, Kennedyites.
If you look at the circumstances that Paddy was confronted by, I remember one afternoon in UEA in Norwich, sitting with Paddy at a moment when we were an asterisk in the opinion polls. We didn't even register. And things were desperate. And his resilience during that period was remarkable. He had a small parliamentary party with no support in the country, and yet he broke through. He broke through because he used his experience, his knowledge, and his reputation on big issues that struck a chord with people. It irritated the hell out of the Daily Mail, but it struck a chord with a lot of people, a lot of progressives, and that's exactly the sort of leadership we now need.
Okay, let's have another question from these good people. That young lady there. Yeah.
Where will your Liberal Democrat Party stand on free market capitalism in light of the 2008 financial crisis, which is widely agreed to be due to a lack of bank regulation?
Okay, would you be tougher on the banks, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really irritated me about the messaging from the Liberal Democrat part of the coalition, and indeed from the coalition, was all this stuff is it's all Labour's fault. And I'll tell you why. Because actually, a large amount of it was Labour's fault, but not in the way the coalition said. So the message from the Tories was, this is all about Labour overspending. That's not what the Tories were saying in 2008. And it's not the truth either. The truth is you can pin a significant amount of blame on the Labour government, but only if you understand that the reason why was because in 1997 they out-Thatchered Mrs Thatcher and let the banks off the leash. That is why we ended up in the mess we're in, or why our problem was even greater than it should have been. And we need to understand that actually, you mentioned free market capitalism. You see, being pro-free market is good, but the capitalism we look at is not free market. People say, Adam Smith, the liberal, he was a liberal economist, talked about there being an invisible hand in the marketplace that makes everything equal and fair. I beg to differ. There is an invisible power in the marketplace, and it's gravity. More attracts to that which is already massive. And we believe in breaking up markets, just like we ought to do with the supermarket, like we ought to do with the banks. You know, in Germany, you've got hundreds and hundreds of banks competing with each other, making sure you don't have single big entities making ludicrous, greedy decisions that drags others down. So we want markets that are regulated, refereed, and broken up and fair. And you can do no better than start with the financial markets.
But Tim, some people would say, you know, not necessarily people of the right, but in a globalised world, you'd also need global champions. And frankly, a tiny corner street bank is not going to be able to compete with world giants like Deutsche Bank, or that's why you actually need some big banks that are British.
You do, but you look at, I mean, the German economy, notwithstanding the euro crisis, we would have a piece of that, wouldn't we? And they have the sort of regulation and the sort of, I'm thinking of a better phrase than balkanisation, but the division of their market into many, many small challenger banks that puts us to shame. And that's proof that actually the more successful economies are often the fairer ones and the better regulated ones.
No?
Wasn't it, did they call it a prawn cocktail initiative?
Offensive.
Offensive.
Prawn cocktail offensive. In John Smith's day.
Peter Mandelson and all the rest.
Yes.
And then, of course, Ed Balls was responsible for the very light regulation of the city, which in part caused the problems that we were confronted by. Another problem, of course, was the over-concentration of power in the hands of a very few banks, which completely distorted the way in which the system worked. And Tim mentions Germany. Germany and the United States have hundreds or thousands of banks. They're regional-based banks. They're local banks.
Whopping big global banks.
They do, but they don't have the same extraordinary concentration of power in the hands of just a few. And I suppose what this party should be about is power to people. So power to consumers, taking on the banks and the energy companies, power to citizens against the overbearing state with the Human Rights Act.
The general election, really?
Well,
they were all on it.
I'm not saying that Ed Miliband was wrong at everything. We should be on the side of people, challenging unaccountable power, whether it's in private hands or in public hands.
Okay, great. Let's have another question from the audience. Let's go to that lady at the front.
I have to admit to not being a Liberal Democrat voter, sorry. I incur the wrath of everyone in the audience.
Not at all. It's good to see you.
The reason is that the message really hasn't gotten through. And I fully support and concur with the social liberalism that you talk about. However, I cannot support economic liberalism. And from what you just said, you support market regulation, which I think conflicts with the philosophy of economic liberalism. So can you be a Liberal Democrat but not support Gladstonian economic liberalism?
Okay. Only a Lib Dem debate do we get such good questions. Norman, answer it.
Well, I think, first of all, you have to believe in a fair society. By that I mean that social justice and the sense of people who don't have power in our system, who suffer entrenched disadvantage. These are things that we cannot tolerate. The idea that we must ensure that every child gets the chance to make the most of their talents in society, and that's not the case these days. We must be always on the side of fighting for equal access to the best education, for equal access to support in public services and so on. But along with that, we accept the case that there is a market economy, a mixed economy, but we absolutely accept the case for proper controls and regulation of those markets and for taking on monopoly and indeed oligopoly, as with the banks and the energy companies, power, which is often unaccountable and which often treats the citizen in a second-class way. So I don't think there's an incompatibility with accepting the case for a market economy, properly regulated, but absolutely always fighting to ensure that there aren't second-class citizens and that we fight for a fairer society.
Tim, I'm going to bring you in on the next one, because there's quite a few people who want to ask questions, so let's have another question. Gentleman there, I think you've got a black T-shirt on. Yeah.
Hi there. Both of you have spoken a lot and used words like radicalism and, progressive and being extremely liberal. But yet, what we actually increasingly see in politics is actually this, Tariq Ali categorised it as a return to the extreme centre. And actually today I'm not really hearing from either of you. Actually, you talked about the strategies that you might employ when campaigning, that you would seek to employ this new radical liberalism, but yet I'm not hearing what that looks like. What is the shape of that? What is this mandate you're talking about? What are those policies you've run on?
Tim, what's the shape of it? We've been going quite a long time and he's not convinced.
Of radical liberalism.
So try and convince him.
So I'm utterly opposed and just bored by managerial politics. If I just wanted to get into power to hold office, I'd join another party. It'd be much easier, I tell you. So I joined... that's not the point. I'd join another party. If all I wanted was power, then I suppose I'd join the Tories at the moment. But that's not all I want. I want power, but I want power to make a difference. And it's about delivering things. So I think that you know, it's right that we talk about philosophy, but in the end, to my mind, I want to do things that make a difference in people's lives and change things. And so my job, I think, is to try and inspire people towards an end that does that. So, for example, I think the biggest crisis facing the United Kingdom in a domestic sense is the housing crisis. And I think that is something that has got worse because of spineless governments for 30 years that have been unimaginative and not tackled it. And I want us to tackle it. And in my neck of the woods, we built, you know, you think it's hard to build houses in Bristol, try building council houses in the Lake District. That is flipping hard work. And we do it. We run the council there. We built 1,000 council houses. And to my mind, it's about motivating and inspiring people to the end. And the story I tell most often, but me and my kids walking the dog bumped into a mum and a dad, their little girl, about 2-3 months ago. And the mum said to my little girl, out of my earshot, she said, "You should be really proud of your daddy. We were in a bed sit. He got us rehoused. Be really proud of your daddy." So he came home, and my daughter told me this, and I had a little cry. And then I said, "Look, if you think about it, sweetheart, you deliver the 55 houses in our estate every single month. As a result, we win the council ward. As a result, we won the council. As a result, we built 1,000 council houses. So, sweetheart, be proud of yourself. You house that family." And what I want to do is get people across the country to realise that political activism is not about sitting around a pub table and talking about politics, much as that's fun. It's actually about doing stuff and making a difference. And that's the radical liberalism I want.
All right, let's go back to that gentleman. Are you more impressed now?
Well, I think what's interesting about that is actually the position you're currently in when you're so far from power. Isn't it the time when really you should be standing up and saying, look, here is an alternative which is so far out from this extreme centre that really that's something that people can get behind. When you're still, you know, in the same sense as everyone else, you know, fitting around the edges with similar policies that are indistinguishable from your competitors.
I mean, we can talk about ideology, and I could do about that. I do a lot of that. But in the end, so what I'm saying is a lot of our future, in the immediate future, it's about winning elections on the ground and making a difference. So we are not in government, but we run the council up in the Lake District. And as a consequence, we do something incredibly brave. And if you were to ask people in my patch what they think we should be most proud of, they'd probably say bringing a cancer unit to the hospital. I say I'm most proud of the council houses. Why? Because nobody's against cancer units. Loads of people are against building new housing. And being brave and being prepared to put off the powerful people that there are to do something which is right for those people who are more powerless, that is something you should be proud of, and that's why I want people on side.
That's it. Norman, what's your answer to this gentleman's complaint that the two of you are just, what did you say, frittering around the edges? That was your phrase? Frittering around the centre. You want something much more out of the box, radical.
Well, first of all, I've just published a little booklet online. It's about 70 pages, and you might want to have a little glance at it one evening. Won't take you very long to get through it. But at its heart, just have a look. But at its heart, it is about giving power to people. And I think often in the way our society works, people feel that they have no power. So when you're thinking, for example, about the way in which we receive public services, so often, and I've seen this, I've witnessed it as a minister, so often people treated badly by the system, ignored, not listened to. And so we need to be always on the side of the citizen about the way in which public services are delivered. We need to be on the side of the consumer in taking on the big monopoly power. We need to be on the side of people in the workplace and argue the case for mutualism. So John Lewis, for example, is a brilliant way of running businesses. So the whole time, in wherever you look, we ought to be on the side of giving power to people in their communities, taking it away from the central government, which so often dictates things to local communities, and people just feel ignored constantly. We must fundamentally, as liberals, be about giving power to people and to communities.
Okay, thanks. So let's have another question. This gentleman straight in front of you. Do you want to wait for the microphone, sir? You've got a good voice, actually, but just for the very hard of hearing, like me.
So, sorry, power.
God's with us.
A very good voice.
So, giving power to the people. I've got kids in education. Does that include agreeing with free schools, allowing everything to happen within your locality? People can start a school, whatever they want it to be, or should we have some benchmark that allows state schools to still survive, not have the stool kicked under their feet because everyone else wants to go and do something different? How do you approach education and give people fair education and an even system?
Well, the truth
is... Not too long if you want, because there's quite a few people still want to ask questions.
The truth, of course, is that the Tories what the Tories are doing isn't about giving power to people, they're imposing change. So they're forcing schools out of local authority control. I've got a very close friend who's a head teacher of a brilliant school which is under local authority control in London. And it's ridiculous, the idea that just changing it to call it an academy suddenly makes it a good school. They say nothing about all the academies that are failing. So they are all about, you know, structures. I'm about ensuring that we have the pursuit of excellence in every school, whatever the ownership or arrangements there are. No, well, but I think...
Which politician? I mean, UKIP, Green, Tory?
Well, no, but what I would say is that the system has failed to deliver it very badly. And if you think about what they call the long tail of underachievement, there are so many children in our country, and they're usually from disadvantaged backgrounds who have been badly let down by the system. And we should be on the side. And incidentally, in government, Andrew, the pupil premium, £2.5 billion this year, allocated to schools for children from the poorest backgrounds, and it holds them to account for how they spend that money in closing the attainment gap. And the latest data from primary schools shows that the gap is closing. Okay. Now, that's something that I think we can be really proud of because it's making a difference to individual children's lives.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a very radical suggestion for how we manage our schools, and that is that a Secretary of State for Education should just step back and let people get on with it. And the interference that... And the only change I would make, actually, is to say academies, fine, it's okay for schools, it's good for schools to have the ability to manage themselves and to have that autonomy. Most head teachers would want that, most parents would want the head teachers to have that. But that doesn't mean you've got to rip them out of the local authority, and we should put them back under a local authority umbrella. Free schools, well, look, if there's an absolute demand, there's a gap there. I've seen it actually has not been a bad way to migrate private schools into the state sector, for instance. I can see a role for them, but I can't see a role that I would defend for ideologically obsessed individuals to set up their own school just because they fancy it. No, absolutely, absolutely.
It has to be a level playing field.
Yeah, it must be. But the pupil premium, and if you want proof that we made a difference these last 5 years, you honestly think that this last government would have spent £2.5 billion on the very schools that the Tories don't send their kids to if it wasn't for us doing it?
Okay.
And now they're talking about undermining it.
That's right. Thanks, gentlemen. Yeah, gentleman there with his hand up. I'm pointing at you.
Hi, I'd just like to pick up on something that Norman said earlier on about being all in favour of organised labour, but that they have no place in a political party. Why not? What does Tim think about that?
Why not? Well, hedge funds have a place in a political party. It's called the Tory party. Why should
exactly, and I'm not particularly attracted by that either. I think political parties, at best, are able to make decisions uninfluenced by particular vested interests. And I stress the point very strongly that I fundamentally believe in the importance of organised labour and protection for employees at work. But I don't think the idea of trade union bosses, which is still continuing, dictating things to the Labour Party or seeking to dictate things, including in getting involved in this leadership election that's underway at the moment, is healthy for democracy, just as I don't like the Tories being dictated to by very wealthy
Tim, do you agree on this? Do we have consensus that trade unions should have no role in politics?
No, of course they should have a role in politics, but I think we're right to criticise them. I mean, I've been a member of trade unions for most of my life. Certainly when I had a proper job, I was a proper member of a trade union and active in it. And I think we should challenge our trade unions because they're very often massively ineffective when it comes to standing up for the rights of employees in the workplace. And yet you have individuals at the top of them who get elected to positions, elected, yes, but on the basis of not much involvement or engagement with the membership across the country. Okay, yeah. And they very often have enormous power. And I think that whilst, you know, if I had to choose in a trade union and a hedge fund, I'd pick the trade union. That doesn't mean I'm uncritical of trade unions.
Quick fire answer to these questions. The Tory proposal to impose a higher threshold before a strike can be legitimate. Agree or disagree with that?
Disagree.
Disagree?
Hang on, did you say it again?
The threshold they're going to introduce.
For up to
the turnout threshold, yeah. They're going to...
no, disagree. Sorry, disagree.
Yeah, you disagree with that.
With
so you both agree with that.
Right?
Forcing union members to positively opt in to the political levy. That's another thing the Tories want to do. Agree or disagree?
I tend to disagree. I tend to disagree.
Why?
Because I think it's the motivation of it. I mean, are we at the same time going to ask every single shareholder of a company, or every employee of a company, whether they're going to permit their company to give money to the Tory party?
Norman?
Well, I've already said that I don't think that there should be that umbilical cord between trade unions and the Labour Party.
So you support the Tory legislation?
Well, I would do other things to separate trade unions from the Labour Party.
No, but on this specific thing about opt-in, opt-out,
I would be minded to support it.
Don't we
just support it?
Yeah.
But you don't?
Don't we just want full financial reform of the political system?
I mean,
so we actually take power out of those people's hands altogether.
Sure. That would be a more rounded solution, but you may have noticed we've got a Tory majority government. So let's have another question for the audience. That gentleman there.
Political opinion is becoming, in Britain, more inward-looking, a bit more Eurosceptic. Can we see the Liberal Party following that opinion, kind of trying to go out and say, look, we're listening to people, or are you going to be more focused on shaping public opinion and being more outward-looking?
Good question, because, I mean, you know, you proudly stand for your liberal values. Nick Clegg debated Nigel Farage, who got the most votes. UKIP, they got more than 4 million. And so, although, Norman, you were asserting earlier, you know, liberal values are ascendant. Actually, if you look at the election result, it's not the case. Now, you're going to stand on your bit of ground, or is that gentleman suggesting you have to shuffle a little bit?
There are two forms of leadership, aren't there? One is where you see which way the public is moving. You run around the front and pretend you're always there. That is not leadership. And the other form is taking a position and trying to argue people onto your ground. Now, my take when it comes to the European Union is that there is a strong, pragmatic case for a yes vote to stay in the EU. And if it was to happen tomorrow, there would probably be a yes vote. But you take nothing for granted, because it looked like we're going to win the campaign in Scotland far better than we did. And, of course, at one stage, it looked like we were going to win the AV referendum. And, of course, we didn't. But so I think the critical issue here is what can we do to elevate this beyond the pragmatic? So there are 3 million jobs that are underpinned by membership of the European Union. That's very important. There is the ability to catch criminals across borders, across the EU, because we belong to it, and that is incredibly important. They are good reasons for voting yes. But you know what? I want us to stand above the other parties and say something quite different and say, do you know what? The European Union, it constitutes the most successful peace process in human history. And you've got 28 countries sat around the table, half a dozen of whom 25 years ago had nuclear weapons on their soil pointed right here. And today we're working together. And I want those messages.
You make a powerful case for that. What do you say to those who say the problem is with the euro, misconceived project from the very start, they say, and look, it's actually it's bringing back to life all those old historical tensions?
Well, certainly the situation with Greece absolutely is worrying, and it's a reminder that you must not humiliate a country.
Quick one.
You look, you look what happened post the First World War.
If Greece doesn't come to terms with the creditors, would you boot them out of the euro?
No, I think, you know, jaw is better than war. You've got to carry on communicating.
But what if they're not serious? And the creditors also, they're just not serious.
What the other euro countries of the EU must do is allow, because as I said, what you must not do is humiliate a people. Do not do that, because they've already opted for the far left. Just think what they might do next if you humiliate that country.
Norman, what about Greece? If they don't come up with a sensible proposal, would you boot them out of the euro?
Well, first of all, it sometimes feels to me horribly like what happened to Germany after the First World War. If you humiliate them, then you have awful consequences. Greece has to confront the massive and overwhelming case for reform of their
They don't
tax
want
system.
to, do they?
No, but there is now sign of some movement from Tsipras. And there was a brilliant speech in the European Parliament by a Liberal challenging Tsipras about the absolute importance of reform. And it now appears right at the 11th hour that he is prepared to consider that. So there is an overwhelming case for a deal to be struck. And there must be debt relief, incidentally. Along with reform. You have to have both. And
if only you two were doing the negotiating.
Exactly.
You know, we wouldn't have gone to this awful pass, would we?
My Greek isn't very good.
Okay, let's have another question from the audience. This young lady, right in front.
Hi. Oh, it's here. I'm one of these much talked about youth
Hello,
in this.
Hello, youth.
And I'm a new Liberal Democrat member, so I'd like to know what...
Thank you.
I'd like to know what you'd want to do with us while you've won us over.
Okay, well, I don't know how to... What do you want to do with that?
What do you want to do? I mean, I think the first thing to say is it's important that anybody who joins the party feels utterly involved straight away, and we get a sense of what your talents and your capabilities are. But it's also important that we kind of explain to people what needs to be done as well. I think one of the things that's occurred to me in my, whatever it is, 29 years of activism in the party, is that people who join a political party, funnily enough, they quite like talking politics. Interesting, that, isn't it? And we tend to give them a bunch of leaflets and tell them to get on with it. Now, what we ought to do is create far more opportunities for you to engage with the people. I'm assuming you live in or near to Bristol. Yeah, so I mean, so you're in a place much easier to get together with the Liberal Democrats than more rural places, for example. So we need to do that. But it's also about trying to bring new members, whether they be young or otherwise, into a situation where they are involved in the main business of politics, which is winning elections.
Okay.
And
let's see. Yeah. Did you like that answer? Did that sound appealing? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's see if Norman can do as well.
So one thing that I think we have completely failed on in the past is that when people join the party, they quite often hear nothing further. And what's the reason for staying? If that's what,
well, they just get the card in the post.
Yeah,
and don't see
it's appalling. And in fact, we pride ourselves on our internal democracy, the fact that, you know, members have a say in electing a new leader and in policy, but it depends in large part on being able to go to a party conference, which costs a fortune, and voting on new policies. So look, in this electronic age, surely we should be able to link everyone up to conferences electronically so that you as a new member has the chance to see what's going on and critically to vote on all new policy. And if we can engage people in that way so that everyone feels they have the chance to vote and have their say on new policy, and we should have regular engagement events so that new members in particular get to understand what the party's about, get down to Westminster, see what's going on in Parliament, look at our councils where we're running things effectively. There are still some left. These are the ways in which we start to get people involved and treat people with respect, treat people equally, and we have to, finally, overcome this complete failure of the party to ensure that women and people from minority ethnic groups succeed in our party so that everyone has the chance to rise to the top, to get elected office, and to make the most of their time.
Okay, and that's our time is nearing a close, but I'm going to try and sneak a... Tell you what, I'm going to take 3, and I hate doing this because they'll just pick the one they like, but I'm going to do that anyway. So we'll start there, please.
Gentlemen, you are standing in a European green city. I've heard virtually nothing about environmental issues, and I'm deeply disappointed because that is one of the main reasons I joined the Lib Dems.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to take that one alone because that was rather good. Yeah, one to the environment. Tim.
Okay, right. Well, first of all, so we face existential threat as a party, but it's not half as great an existential threat as the planet faces. And what we need to do is grab climate change and make it matter to people in a way that is absolutely relevant to them. We talk about climate change as though, no offence, it's only of interest to people who get to page 25 of The Guardian. This is something that is absolutely existential to every single one of us. So you need to talk about it, and we need to talk about it, in ways that remind people of the impact. We're talking about a mass movement of tens of millions of people. We're talking about the fact that if you are terrified about climate change, and you're terrified about migration, you should be terrified about climate change. If you're terrified about economic instability, you should be terrified about climate change. The problem is we don't worry people and terrify people enough with the science that they understand exactly what is happening, and then we don't, with any colour, give them any hope at the other end. So my criticism of the Greens, and indeed the Green movement as a whole, is that the answer to that calamitous threat we face is hair, shirt and austerity. And politics is the art of moving people from one place to the other. And hair, shirt and austerity might move 5% if you're lucky. The planet's doomed in that case. In which case, we have got to make sure we move 50, 60, 70% of people. And that means offering real hope. So not just one tidal lagoon off Swansea Bay, brilliant. 35 of the blighters around the country. Insulating every single home in this country. Understanding that amongst the things that George Osborne got wrong yesterday was his failure to use the low interest rates to invest in capital in a green infrastructure boom around this country. I want tackling the green challenge, climate change, to be a unifying, affirming, utterly joyful experience that makes us richer, not poorer.
Norman?
So, look, I've grown up with this. My dad just happened to be a world-leading climatologist. He set up the Climatic Research Unit at the University of East Anglia. So this has been part of my life for a very long time, and this has to be a fundamental part of what we are about. One of the things that I always say as liberals is that along with freedom comes responsibility, and one of the responsibilities is the proper stewardship of our planet, not only for ourselves, but for future generations. And two ideas that I've proposed in this campaign that I think we should pursue. This is a time of historically low interest rates. It's madness not to invest in our infrastructure. And so, first of all, why on earth? We have the worst insulated housing stock in the whole of Europe. It's massively wasteful. It's massively costly to people in their homes. So why don't we, instead of funding the next tax cut, actually fund insulating every home in our country? It would deliver a reduction in energy bills for every family in our country, and it would massively cut carbon emissions. Why don't we also finally catch up with Germany, with France, with Denmark, and with Holland in making every town and city in our country cycle-friendly? This is an investment that we should be making. It would have a massive impact on public health, it would reduce pollution, and it would reduce carbon emissions. These things, investing big in infrastructure, investing for the future, and recognising the imperative of tackling climate change is what this party should lead on.
Okay, thank you, Norman. We're drawing to a close, alas, and I'm very sorry for those of you who didn't get to your question put, but you might be able to grab the candidates on their way out if you're burning with a passion. But I want to ask one last one, and I thought we'd end, since you're trying to be nice to each other anyway during these hustings. I'm going to ask this. Tim, what's the quality you most admire in Norman?
Okay, loads. I mean, don't know where to start, but
I'll
start at the
one, because we haven't got too
Okay,
much
I'll start at the beginning. In May 2005, I was massively blessed by the Chief Whip's decision to make Norman my mentor as a new Member of Parliament. And amongst the things...
Great reward, and then now you're challenging him for the leader.
Utter ingratitude. Utter ingratitude.
Yeah,
so
bloody
amongst things he taught me was absolutely no deference whatsoever. And that's actually true. And in particular, not to have deference to the system and to Parliament, and to make best use of your time, and to realise that you don't go and play the establishment game in Westminster. You use every minute of your time to make a difference for your constituents and for what you believe in, and I owe that to Norman.
Norman, I'm going to ask the same of you. What's the quality you most admire in Tim?
So, no, this is the thanks you get. You help build his majority, and then you get challenged like that.
It's the Miliband brothers all over again.
Absolutely. Tim's a great campaigner, and he can, in an audience like the party conference, he can get the troops going and rally them to the cause, and that's a very effective skill to have. And I actually think that the combination of the two of us, with the experience I've got, with the credibility I've got with opponents, as well as on our own side, on the stuff that I've done in government, and with Tim's campaigning skills, we could be pretty effective
dream
together.
ticket.
Absolutely.
There you go. But with you as number one.
Absolutely. Of course.
On that very happy note, I'd like to thank the two candidates for debating this evening. Thanking all of you for forsaking the alcohol and the sun for listening to them at this Guardian Live event. Lovely to see you all. Great questions. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Most fun one we've done. Really good. I really enjoyed it.